Hi everyone. In this video, I'd like to show you the difference between shifting and pivoting. Pivoting is an unbelievably practical and economical way of moving between two neighboring positions. And it is part of Paganini technique because, as you probably know by now, if you've watched the previous videos on Paganini technique, it is a lot about very economical movements. Now let's take this apart a little bit. Shifting is done with the whole hand and the whole arm. The whole hand moves in its frame with the thumb into the new position. The whole arm moves. So it's quite a large movement. Pivoting is just a matter of changing the angle of the hand. So it's a much smaller and more economical movement. We use pivoting if we, for example, have just one note in a neighboring position, because then we don't need to shift. We can be more precise just changing the angle of our hand than we can be if we would actually shift using our whole arm. So pivoting is more economical and we can be more precise. It's also faster because we're moving less mass. We're just changing the angle of our hand. So, for example, if we're moving between first and second position, that's quite an unpractical movement, shifting this much between first and second position. Much more practical to just pivot. So you see the differences. When I shift, I move my whole arm. And it's difficult to be precise. We all know shifting is difficult. When I pivot, I just change the angle of my hand, and that moves my first finger from C down to B. I'll show you from this angle. The thumb stays in second position. I just change the angle of my hand, and that moves the first finger from C to B. Now I'd like to give you an exercise to practice which will make the difference between shifting and pivoting very clear and conscious, because the more conscious you are of the difference between shifting and pivoting, the more you'll be able to use pivoting when appropriate. It's appropriate when you have a neighboring position and you only have to play one note in the neighboring position. You save yourself the shift by just pivoting with your hand. Now we're going to start with shifting. We're going to shift from first position to second position, back and forth. We're going to shift with the first finger, shifting from B to C. So we're playing first finger B in first position. We shift up to first finger C in second position. Then we play second finger D in second position, third finger E, fourth finger F, and back down again, third finger E, second finger D, first finger C, and then we shift back down to first finger B in first position. As you can see, I'm moving my whole arm while shifting, and the whole hand moves from first position to second position and back to first position in its entire frame with the thumb. So you see, the whole hand is moving in its frame. That's shifting. Practice that a little bit to make the shifting very conscious, because you need to know the difference between shifting and pivoting, and you can best know that if you make the technique of shifting very conscious. Now we'll do the same exercise, but instead of shifting, we're going to pivot our hand. Bring your hand into second position, first finger C. Now your hand is in second position. Make sure your thumb is also in second position. You have to be completely in second position because that's where your hand stays. And then you just pivot your hand by changing the angle. And the changing of the angle brings your first finger down to the B. And you play the same exercise. So it's the same exercise, first finger B in first position, but you're not in first position, you're in second position. So you pivot your hand down to first finger B, keeping the thumb and everything else in second position. And then you pivot back, first finger C, second finger D, third finger E, fourth finger F, and back down again. Notice how I just changed the angle of my hand. Notice how the thumb stays in second position. So you could already see that this is a lot more economical. So the biggest difference between shifting and pivoting is in shifting, we take our thumb along. In pivoting, we keep our hand in second position and just change the angle. And the changing of the angle brings the first finger down to the B and back up to the C. Very practical and a true shortcut to left hand technique, because it's so much easier just to change the angle of your hand than it is to shift. And like I said, this is useful if you have just one note in a neighboring position. If you have more than one note in the neighboring position, it's not sensible, because the changing of the angle of the hand basically messes up your hand position. So if you have more notes to play in first position, for example, you're in second position, you have more notes to play in first position. You don't want to just change the angle of your hand, because then you don't have the correct hand position for first position and your notes will be out of tune. So if you have several notes to play in a neighboring position, then it makes sense to shift and move your whole hand frame into the new position so that you have the correct hand position for a reliable and secure intonation. So this is only useful if it's just one note that you need in the neighboring position. Then it's enough to just change the angle of your hand, and the changing of the angle of your hand moves the first finger down, into first position, to the B, and back. So don't use this if you have several notes to play in a neighboring position. That's not helpful. Like I said, that will just mess up your hand position, which will make the intonation very insecure. But if you have just one note, and we often have just one note in a neighboring position, then pivoting is a great solution. Practice this exercise on all 4 strings, shifting and pivoting, so that you notice the difference and feel the difference, because then you'll be able to apply it in repertoire, and it actually really does make violin playing easier. So I hope you enjoy this exercise. Let me know if you have any questions, and happy practicing.